Well, welcome everyone to this keynote today. I'm delighted to introduce to you Alaric Maude, who will be speaking to you from South Australia on what makes geographical knowledge powerful. Thank you, Alaric.
Greetings to all of you, wherever you happen to be, possibly especially to some of my friends in Singapore and in England. I'm talking to you, as Gina said, from South Australia, which popularly will be thought of as down under, but as good geographers you will know that there is actually no top or bottom. North and south are conventions, and our globe spins in the world. So in Australia we have a corrected map of the world in which the southern hemisphere is all along the top. We are not down under. It's also confusing geographically that Australia, as a developed nation, is called part of the global north, although we happen to be in the south. And if you ever wonder why Australians are occasionally confused, that is one of the reasons. Anyway, that bit of knowledge might actually be called powerful, because it gets people thinking about what is up, what is down, what is north, what is south, how do we classify bits of the world that make sense, and how do we fit in with anomalies like Australia, which seems to be in the wrong position in a global sense. So what I want to talk about is what makes geographical knowledge powerful. I'll introduce the idea of what is powerful knowledge, which you've probably had something on already. Then what makes this knowledge geographical, and talk about what I describe as 5 types of powerful geographical knowledge. And at the end, I'll talk a little bit about how geography educators and some teachers have used this classification. When I started looking into powerful knowledge, particularly as it was written about by Michael Young, the professor of sociology in London, in looking at his writings, it seemed to me there were 2 different ideas about powerful knowledge. The one that was dominant at the beginning was it's knowledge that is produced in the academic world, which means that it's, as the quote says, reliable, fallible, and potentially testable. And it therefore is seen to be powerful because, as Young has written somewhere else, it is the best knowledge that we have at present. It is always subject to revision. It's a human product, it's not immutable. But because of the way it is generated and tested, it is thought to be powerful in that sense. And the natural sciences are the, I suppose, quintessential idea of powerful knowledge of this type. But in Michael Young's writings, there's a lot of also the idea that knowledge is powerful because of the intellectual power that it gives to people who've got it. It's not necessarily what that knowledge is based on, i.e. academic work. It's what it does to those who have it. And I think this is a more useful way to look at the idea of powerful knowledge, because in teaching young people, we want to give them abilities, powers that they don't necessarily already have. They come to school, as Michael Young says, to learn what they don't know, to be extended beyond their sphere of experience. to be introduced to ways of thinking that will be new to them. And putting the emphasis on what power this knowledge gives to students, I think helps also because school geography is not simply a stripped down version of university geography. It is, I think, a separate subject in its own right, with a lot of connections to academic geography, but it's not the same. It has a different purpose, it has a different rationale, and it's not just a sort of shadow of academic geography. When I started thinking this way, I got very frustrated with some of the, I went to a seminar in London once, which was about powerful geographical knowledge, in which no one actually talked about what knowledge did geography have that could be considered powerful. And I came back to Australia and started thinking. And it seemed to me that there were these ideas in Michael Young's writings and others that are what makes knowledge powerful. And then I'll come to what makes that knowledge geographical. So it's new ways of thinking, ways of explaining and understanding, power over your own knowledge, and so on. These seem to be the key ideas coming through that sociological literature about what makes knowledge powerful for young people and for older people as well. What then do we need to think about that makes those powers something that's geographical? And that seems to me to be when we use geography's major concepts and convert them into ways of thinking, ways of explaining, ways of understanding, and so on, that are distinctively geographical ways of using those powers. And there's a list there of geography's major concepts. Different countries have different ideas about what these concepts should be, but I think pretty well every school curriculum in English that I've looked at would have place, space, and environment at the top of their list. Some people have sustainable development rather than sustainability. Some have things like region, but I would call that a subset of place. And some have landscape, which I would regard as a subset of environment. So there's fairly broad agreement, I think, amongst geography educators as to what our major concepts are. So how do we turn them into powerful geographical knowledge? And I have 5 types of powerful geographical knowledge to work through. The first one, I think, and probably the most important one, is that geography's concepts produce ways of thinking. And I would argue that these are ways of thinking that are distinctively geographical. They're not exclusively geographical because other disciplines use space and place, but I don't think any other discipline uses place, space, and environment frequently in combination and as their predominant ways of thinking. And the importance of a concept like place or space is that it immediately gets you thinking about what questions does this suggest. If I look at this problem from a spatial point of view? What questions should I ask? And possibly what explanations might I be looking for? So the way we look at the world, the way we look at, say, climate change or forest clearing or urbanization is a geographical way because it's based on using these concepts of place, space, environment, and so on. So let's take an example. Place is, I think, becoming my favorite geographical concept. And some geographers argue that it's probably our most important concept. And you could describe an aspect of the concept of place in the statement I've put there, that each place is unique in its characteristics. And the consequence of that uniqueness is that similar environmental and socio-economic processes are likely to produce different outcomes in different places because they are interacting with unique contexts in each place. So the result of a similar environmental process in one place may be different in another. So a tropical cyclone of the same power may have a different effect on different places according to the standard of the buildings, the topography of the place, the shape of the coastline, the preparedness of the community, and a whole lot of things. The effect of similar cyclones varies according to the characteristics of the places that they strike. And the experience of the southern United States has provided wonderful examples of these sorts of effects of place. Because places are unique, similar problems may often require different strategies. We might say that place means that one size doesn't fit all. And unfortunately, national governments tend to have the same solution to what they think is the same problem in similar places, but the places are not similar, and their policies may have completely the wrong effects in some places and work in others. Geographers are very sensitive to this belief that the context of each place, its distinctive characteristics, need to be taken into account. Place matters. So that's a way of thinking that geographers probably now instinctively have when they're looking at a problem. What is it about this place that I need to be cautious in thinking about? Environment's another concept that I think is very rich. And we could say it supports and enriches our life in 4 ways. It provides raw materials and food. It deals with our wastes. It maintains a safe habitat. For example, through controlling climate, except that we're in the process of upsetting that. And it is a source of enjoyment, inspiration, and identity. 4 different ways in which the environment is important to us for survival and for the quality of our life. And if students understand all of that and can give you examples of it from their own experience, I think they will have a very deep appreciation of why the environment is important and why the sustainability of those functions of the environment is also important. So that's a way of thinking that can be very powerful. Type 2 ways of analysing, explaining, and understanding. And some quick examples of this: when we analyse geographically, we often use the concept of space to analyse a spatial distribution and to get ideas about what is guiding the phenomenon that is being mapped. Currently, this is a very interesting thing to follow because mapping the spread of the coronavirus is vitally important in finding ways to deal with it and stop it spreading further. So we are getting lockdowns which are spatially targeted to areas which need to be focused on, allowing other parts of the nation or the region to live a more normal life. Mapping, looking at the distribution, looking at how it's changing is quite fundamental at present. We use the idea of scale to test relationships at different spatial scales, because relationships that work at one scale may not work at another one. Different things have to be taken into account. We may explain things using the concept of space by saying, well, this town is partly what it's like because of where it's located relative to other towns. It may be very isolated, as many places in Australia are, or it may be very central to business and population and have quite different characteristics. So we use a whole range of our concepts to identify ways of explaining. And we use our concepts to generalize our knowledge. And what Michael Young would argue is, when you can generalize your knowledge out of one case study and apply it to something that you know nothing about to start with, a distant place, you read about it, and you use what you've learnt from one case study, a generalization, to make sense of another. That can be pretty powerful because it enables the student to understand things well beyond their current experience and to make sense of places. So the one that is on the slide is about social segregation in cities, and when different groups are spatially segregated, so you have predominantly lower income areas, predominantly middle, predominantly higher income areas, spatially segregated, that tends to perpetuate those inequalities. Because, for example, schools in the higher income area tend to be better resourced than schools in lower income areas. Health tends to differ between areas of different socioeconomic status. And so those inequalities can be perpetuated if they're spatially segregated. That's using our concept of space. Knowledge that gives students some power over their own knowledge. Knowing how to acquire knowledge, which is what teachers are very good at teaching. Evaluating claims about knowledge. I'm particularly interested in how we help students to be critical of their own opinions, not just everyone else's, but to be equally critical about what they think and why they think it. And to know something about knowledge of what we can know and how we can know it. Things that have the dreadful names ontology and epistemology, but are actually rather important things for kids to get some idea of what they mean and how they apply to them. This will be a fairly obvious one, but in any society, knowledge that gives you the power to be involved in debates, whether they're local in your little town, national or global, gives you some power, some ability to influence. If you don't know anything about these debates, you don't have the ability to be involved. In that sense, you have no power whatsoever. And the final one, knowledge of the world. Because Michael Young talks about powerful knowledge as being knowledge beyond a young person's experience of the world. So knowing about other places, other countries can be powerful. It enables you to make sense of some of the things that you read about or hear about on the news. And what I found interesting about this idea is that it provides a justification, I think, a strong intellectual justification for teaching about other places. One stage geography was very strongly teaching regional geography, and that became regarded as very boring, which it frequently was, and unintellectual. But I think teaching students the ability to find out about other places, to ask sensible questions about them, to know how to analyze them so they can make sense of what's going on, that is powerful. One thing I think is missing in the whole concept is something to do with ethics, because not every bit of powerful knowledge is necessarily socially beneficial. And currently, with the emphasis on Facebook and Twitter trying to manipulate us, and using well-developed psychological knowledge to better manipulate us, that's not beneficial. So I think we need to evaluate our use of knowledge against how it contributes to sustainability and how it contributes to human well-being as a way of making sure that our knowledge is ethical and socially beneficial. Now, since I developed these 5 types, a surprising number of geography educators and a few teachers have been using them, and some have published what they have found. I have talked to a few teachers, but not nearly enough, where they've said they've used that to guide their teaching of geography in schools. But I've also seen in publications how the 5 types were used to evaluate what I would say was the intellectual level of a school curriculum in 3 countries, students' essays at A level in England, students' GIS projects, a very interesting study there, again in England, and what teachers, both in training and after training, thought geography was all about, assessing that. Now, all of this could have been done using Bloom's taxonomy, but in this case, because the 5 types that I've been talking about are specifically geographical, they seem to have been quite useful in evaluating the intellectual level of those studies. So people have said it's useful. What they think it finds is that there's sometimes overemphasis on technical skills and an underemphasis on conceptual, analytical, and explanatory thinking. There's very little about type 3 knowledge that gives you power over your own knowledge. And particularly from several studies in the Netherlands, the argument that all 5 types of knowledge need to be combined to be powerful because they intersect and they reinforce each other. So on the whole, people seem to have found them useful ways of thinking about what they're teaching, what they should be teaching, what emphasis to give. And my conclusion is that it's important to understand that the concept of powerful knowledge does not tell teachers what content to teach. There's no prescribed list of topics that constitute powerful geographical knowledge. What should be taught in places is what is relevant to that place, to those students, to those teachers. The point that powerful geographical knowledge says is that whatever you do teach should help students to learn these powerful geographical ways of thinking, analysing, explaining, and understanding. And you can use all sorts of different content to achieve those aims. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Alaric. Fantastic. I think you've concluded at a point around that a range of different content is possible to be developed in ways that will advance powerful knowledge in young people. There's a kind of a silence, I think, in around what then might be powerful pedagogies, which is beyond this presentation. But I think an important part of the question, if precise content doesn't matter, are there precise pedagogical approaches that do matter? And if they do matter, how much do they matter? And I'm pleased to report that Margaret Roberts will be giving a keynote subsequent to this one in which she will interrogate that idea of powerful pedagogy. So thank you once again, Alaric, and we'll sign off now.
Thank you.